Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me this morning. Um, this is one of those stories that it's kind of almost it's very difficult to get your head around. And sure enough, Genevieve's story came out this week, published in Redux, and I thought it would have an. This is how naive I am. I thought it would have an immediate kind of worldwide impact because it's so extraordinary. But I think what sometimes happens is that this week we've had men lactating, feeding their children, and admitting to getting off on it, things like this. These stories just keep coming in. So the grotesqueness of it is sometimes a little bit. I think sometimes big stories get lost. But I really, really want people to understand this is a massive story, and the implications of this are just extraordinary. So I'm going to bring in Genevieve now to talk about it. Hopefully I'll get the right button. Will I get the right button? Hold on a sec. No, I got the wrong button. Hi, Genevieve. How are you doing?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Actually, Genevieve, I told you just before we were going to begin with WPATH, but I realized it might be better just to have a quick explanation of who you are, what you do, and who Redux are. Could you tell us a little bit about the research that you're doing for the magazine at the moment?
Sure. Yeah. So I recently I've been starting to look into the connections between gender identity and pornography. I started to do that sometime around 2019, kind of more seriously. And I couldn't kind of believe it at first. The more I started to look into it, the more there was. It's just kind of never ending. So I started to write about it and to look into more detail on the issue. And specifically, not only just these crazy stories that are on Reddit or these anecdotal kinds of things that you hear about so often now, but I wanted to kind of take it up to the top and to look at some of the organizations and some of the theory. And so when I started to look into things like that, pieces started to fall into place. I think one of the first people that I really looked more deeply into was Andrea Long Chu, who kind of famously compared being a woman to a sex act. So it kind of snowballed for me from there. And Redux, we started, myself and Anna Slatz started in end of January. So it's only been a few months now, and we're just kind of constantly churning out these articles about, safeguarding and women's rights in particular. So.
Yeah. I know Anna has said that she recently edited or wrote 7 stories about predators using a trans identity. So, I mean,
in 1 week, 7 in 1 week.
1 week. Yes, sorry. Yeah. Just extraordinary. And they come in every day. I mean, one guy, what's his name? The writer, John Boyne, accused me of only publishing nasty stories about trans people. But the thing is that this is an emergency because this is what's happening. But anyway, that's by the by. Let's move on to this particular story that you published this week. To give a little bit of background first, can you just tell us who are WPATH and why are they so important to the trans debate?
Okay, so WPATH stands for the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It's got that world in there. They're based in the US, though. So they kind of lead.
We're used to that.
Yeah, so initially they were called the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Clinic, some really long name, but based off of Harry Benjamin and his work. If you look at the origin of WPATH, it's actually kind of interesting and mad in itself because it was kind of started by this trans man who also did research about communicating with dolphins and was into New Age spirituality. Right.
Had sex with a dolphin? Am I remembering?
I don't believe so. I believe there was research that involved that in some capacity, but this person in particular didn't. Yeah.
Let's just get that out of the way.
But yeah, so from its get-go, it's kind of got this strange, but also sort of got this religious or spirituality angle from its beginnings. So,
but despite this, cited as an expert in these matters, and its
Right, right.
advice is followed. Would it be fair to say the advice from WPATH is followed in by organizations like Stonewall, and would that be fair to say?
I think that would be fair to say. Certainly in the U.S., I'm aware that gender clinics are following them, by the letter. Uh, so I mean, it depends from country to country, but obviously they're hugely influential. So
Okay. Okay. So look, that was important background. So let's get to the meat, if you excuse the pun of this. This is the headline that Redux published the other day, and I'm just going to read a little bit of it, and then we'll stop to talk about it. Okay, Genevieve. Um, Top Trans Medical Association collaborated with castration, child abuse fetishists. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, the International Medical Association, which sets guidelines for the medical transitioning of children, has been collaborating with participants of a fetish forum that hosts and produces fictional child pornography and extreme sadomasochistic content. On December the 3rd, 2021, WPATH released draft guidelines, which included, for the first time, the category of eunuch as a protected gender identity. WPATH's updated 8th edition of their Standards of Care, SOC, which recommends medical treatment and services for those with a self-declared gender identity, describes the relationship between eunuch-identified people and other transgender people. The document states, eunuch-identified people may share with other gender-diverse people a desire for reduction or elimination of masculine physical features, masculine genitals, or genital functioning. Okay. Now, that's kind of a long way around saying that essentially these are people who are aroused by castration, the idea of castrating themselves and the idea of castrating others. Would that be fair to say?
yeah, yeah, I think that's fair. Um,
And how let's get a bit of background first. How did you find out that this was that this site existed in the first place? Did you know immediately it was connected to WPATH, or did that come later?
Well, actually, it's really interesting you mentioned that because the day that these guidelines came out was the same day that had just published to my Substack about castration cults. So I started looking into the castration cult aspect maybe around, it's hard to say, maybe 2020, like maybe around that time.
Mm-hmm.
And my concern was obviously with the puberty blocking drugs that are also used to chemically castrate sex offenders. Um, Again, I'm from the U.S., so I'm familiar with some states that do that. I'm not familiar with how often Europe does it, for example, but I know that it's not uncommon in the U.S. and some states have been doing it for a couple of decades. But I was really curious and confused about the overlap between the treatment of sex offenders with this chemical castration and why it was being given to children and why no one seemed to be paying attention to that. And the another interesting thing too, and I'll move on in just a second, but is that it's not even given to just the regular run of the mill sex offender. It's your most recidivist, most dangerous sex offenders that are given these kinds of drugs. So
Wow. And these
right,
are these are what drugs are these?
GnRH agonists, which maybe people would be familiar with the name Lupron since it's one of the most commonly used, but
Mm.
it's in that class of drugs. And that's what is used as a puberty blocker for children. Now, it's very clear that it's chemical castration. Any kind of medical professional who's pretending that that isn't the case seems a bit disingenuous to me knowing its other use. So I really started to get interested in the topic of why is this connection there? What is the connection with castration? Why is that a thing? And I started to notice, well, as you know, I wrote that piece in 2020 about sissy pornography. And
Yes.
then that led me down to the rabbit hole of the castration fetish. So I had actually been looking at that myself before this happened, and like I said, I published that piece the same day that WPATH released these updated draft standards of care. So when I looked at that, it just I went, aha, they're using the Eunuch archives. I'd already known about the Eunuch archives for what I was looking at. And, I was just gobsmacked.
So explain what people can find on the Eunuch archives. What if you go onto the site? So sorry, first of all, you kind of managed to kind of sneak onto the site by pretending you were interested in this stuff, isn't that right?
Right, right. They have a very rigorous process for vetting people, which I discovered pretty quickly, as they will check ISP addresses and things like this. So I managed to get into the password protected area of the website, which is the fiction archive. Now, if you go to the website, it looks like it's from 1995 or something. It's got this very outdated look. There's a
Mm.
reason for that that has to do with its history. But anyway, I was able to get into the fiction archives, which are mentioned in the WPATH standards of care, and they're mentioned in this very passing way. They call it, I think they refer to it as fantasy. The Eunuch archive is filled with fantasy, which is such an
Well, yeah, yeah, sorry, go on.
So the contents that are behind the password protected area are, it's about roughly about 10,000 fiction stories that have been collected over a couple of decades, written by forum members, and among them, nearly half contain the theme of children. So some around 4,000 of them
Wow.
are tagged with minor. Um,
So this
and
is child pornography. This is
yeah,
fictional child pornography. Okay.
exactly, exactly. And
Oh,
even
and let me make that clear. This is fictional child pornography about castrating children and about
mhm,
removing their genitals, removing their ability, also chemical castration. Isn't that right?
yes, yeah, all of it. There's stories in there about doctors, um, doctors castrating children and then sexually abusing them, that are written are in extreme graphic detail. Stories about children being killed, raped, killed, tortured, all of those things. There's snuff involving children too.
So these are so I want to keep bringing people back to the central point of this. This is WPATH linking to this website. Now, is there any official link between the? Can you go from WPATH to the Eunuch Archives website? Is there any way they say, "Oh, this is a good resource for this area"? Something like
Yeah, well, it's mentioned in the standards of care draft. Like I said, it's used as a resource in their standards of care, which is the version 8, the draft that was released. It puts the URL in there, and it links to it. But also, one of the site members, I learned during the investigation, one of the main site members, one of the formative site members, has been invited by WPATH to speak at conferences as early as 2009. So his name, which I put in the article, Christopher Willett, he was in 2009 invited to a WPATH conference in Oslo, where he spoke about, the castration as an identity. And then again in 2010, WPATH published his some of work that he co-authored on this topic, in their International Journal of Transgenderism. And then in 2011, he spoke again at another WPATH conference in Georgia.
Okay, okay. Let me read out a little bit of what you have in the piece here. The Eunuch Archive began in the late 1990s in collaboration with body modification easing (BME) and was initially hosted on the same site. BME achieved some notoriety in the early 2000s for a viral video titled "Pain Olympics," which featured men mutilating their genitals on camera. Was that a court case in the UK by any chance?
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay, I remember reading something about that there was in the old days when I thought people should be able to do what they want. I remember being very angry that a bunch of blokes who hammered nails into their testicles were being charged. I thought, haven't they suffered enough? But anyway, I thought it might have something to do with this. Prior to the official launch of the archive itself, members would congregate on a Usenet forum by the same name, which advertised itself in a news group dedicated to sadomasochism, alt-sex bondage, a discussion group credited with coining the acronym BDSM in 1991. In the news group Eunuch Questions, members, and this is the thing I want people to listen to, members shared castration fantasies, offered services. When you say services, do you mean medical services, like castration?
Yeah.
Traded castration photos and videos, sought to connect with young men to feminize, asked for advice on chemical castration, and recommended doctors willing to perform surgeries without psychiatric evaluations. I should point out that some of the people in TENI, which is the Irish kind of trans group, are quite proud about running a kind of backwoods orchiectomy clinic. Is that how you pronounce it? How do you pronounce that word?
That's how I prounce it. Orchiectomy. Yeah.
Orchiectomy clinic, and they're actually very open about this. So, that sprung to mind when I was reading this as well. An FAQ document published at the beginning of the site's development recommended several other torture and bondage pornography forums for users to share image and request cutters, inverted commas. What's a cutter?
Euphemism.
Someone, or is it a person or a thing?
It's a person. It's a euphemism for the person who would do like an amateur orchiectomy.
Okay. Notably, Usenet forums were the target of the FBI's first investigations into internet-based paedophile rings, as it provided a space for organizing and exchanging of child sex abuse materials, including written pornography. Now, again, this is WPATH. WPATH, that's not describing WPATH. That's describing a website that WPATH recommends, takes advice from, and receives training from. I don't know. I mean, at this stage, I have to. Why do you think that? Like, we've been talking about this story for months. You've been working on it for months, and again, it just doesn't seem to be. People don't seem to be clicking about why this is significant. Why do you think it's significant?
Well, it establishes the connection that many of us who have been involved in this issue have speculated about for some time, which is the overlap, the very clear overlap between sex offenders and the gender identity movement. It demonstrates, in my opinion, it demonstrates how the male sexual fetish is being extended onto children in order to justify what I would consider genital mutilation and extreme harm of children, in order to satisfy and normalize their own particular sexual fetishes, in order to make them feel as though their sadomasochistic intentions are somehow normal or innate.
Also, I can't help imagining that the recent archive, or the recent stories in the archive, surely must be using as a basis what's happening to young men at the moment who are confused about their gender identity and are being told that they should transition, remove their genitals, etc., etc. I would imagine there's stories in there that reflect that.
Well, look, I read a story from 2000, so from 20 years ago, that had to do with a doctor who was presented with a young child who had stopped puberty, who had stunted puberty and was frozen like a child, and then proceeded to rape that child. And this is 20 years ago. And then you've got to consider too that I don't even know exactly how long they may have been aware of each other, or whatever you want to call it. I got criticized for using the word collaborate, but I mean, I don't know what else to call it when WPATH invites this forum member to their meetings. So that was 2009 at least. So we're talking, this particular draft has been in the works for over 10 years. How much further back does it go?
What do you think is going on here in terms of, like, why would WPATH run the risk of associating themselves with this group? Why are they so blasé about it? Is it just a sense that they are untouchable?
Oh, no one would believe it. You know, it's almost as if, like, you do the most shocking thing and in plain sight, and nobody believes you or something like that. I don't know. That's just my theory. I mean, it could be that they truly believe that this is an oppressed minority group of people who need to be, catered to, or something like that. That could very well be the case as well. But my speculation is just that, well, it's very obvious that they understand that this content on their website is so damning and shocking because they monitor who can access it very strictly.
Mm.
Um,
It's
I
password.
actually,
It's the only
I,
part of the site that's password protected.
and I actually that was one of my big concerns in researching this, was how do I will people believe me, and how can I even back up any of these stories, because you can't save them at most. I thought, oh, I could screenshot them. I actually started to feel ill when I was doing that, so I stopped. But
But
I
you have
was
a
able
few.
to
You have a few.
I have oh no, I have a large archive of them that I found through the Internet Archives. So in order to bypass the password protect, so my concern there was, people aren't going to believe me, so I need something. I need to come back with something. So
How big is the archive now of collected stuff that you have?
oh, this isn't actually an archive link from like the Wayback Machine. So
Oh, okay.
um,
So you
so I
could,
think
yeah. So you could pass that on to fellow journalists if required.
right,
Okay.
right.
I mean, we. I remember telling this to a friend of ours. We were trying to get the story into British newspapers, but it's very difficult to get the story to British newspapers because, I guess, because of the reasons you say, people just don't believe it, or because it doesn't have an immediate UK connection. But I remember telling our friend about this, and I described it to him, and there was like a 20-second silence on the other end of the phone. He simply couldn't believe what I just said, you know. And I do think that it's part of the problem. Like this week, we've had the lactating fetishists who are literally admitting to get in one newspaper article, literally admitting to getting off on the
Mm,
experience, but through feeding their kids some sort of disgusting chemical mixture that men can do when they've had estrogen. So I guess people might be a little bit exhausted from the grotesqueness
mm.
of this fight. Would you say that has something to do with it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that has something to do with it. I also think that the field of sexology, the complete kind of coup that's gone on in the field of sexology with certain fetishists. For example, I wrote that piece about Dr. Christina Richards, who works at the adult section of the Tavistock, and he actually collaborated on this standards of care document as well. He calls for the complete normalization of age play and furry fetishes as further sexualities. So
That's someone who
there,
works in the Tavistock right now.
yes, the adult section, by the way, not with children, the adult section, but he did work on the adult section of the standards of care of this draft as well. Um, there I said this to you before, but I said it's like shaking an apple tree. You find one and then they all start to fall down, but the apples are all rotten and keep
Mm.
hitting you in the face, and it's like
Yeah, yeah.
there's just it's the institutional power that some of these men have, where they have these bizarre, even damaging and harmful fetishes, having control and no oversight. Who oversees WPATH? I mean, I don't know. Do you? Who oversees the sexologists? So that's a big concern.
I think people look at an organization like WPATH and they believe that WPATH are the organization that should be overseeing it
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
WPATH are so respected and so constantly cited. But what we see here is that WPATH are deeply corrupt. I mean, this is purely to normalize a fetish that is, shall we say, at least 40% pedophilic. You know, because
And let me
if you've got four
let
thousand stories about young children being castrated, that's a pedophile's website. There's no way around it.
Yeah, there's a couple of other points I wanted to make before I forget too, which is so some people had asked me, Did you report them, and why is no action being taken? No legal action.
Yeah.
Those are good questions, but in US law, this is not illegal. Written child pornography is totally legal. This was done in a 2002 Supreme Court decision called Ashcroft versus the Free Speech Coalition. The Free Speech Coalition is a lobbying arm of the pornography industry in the US. And so in 2002, they used works such as Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet to argue that fictional child pornography was free speech. So what they are doing is actually within the law. I've had this problem before where I tried to report a man who was taking images of children off the internet and using them to write fictional stories alongside them. Nothing can be done. What they're doing is legal. Um, so that is a big problem as well.
Mm, mm. Well, perhaps I don't know. Maybe something can be done about questioning, whether these people should be giving any advice to organizations like the Tavistock. I mean, you have someone. Let's. I like to reiterate things. You have, what's that doctor's name?
Dr. Christina Richards.
Dr. Christina Richards. And what's Dr. Christina Richards' connection again?
He worked on the standards of care for WPATH. He works for EPATH, so for Europe, and for WPATH.
And did Dr. Christina put, is it a man or woman? I always have to ask. Oh, it's a man. Okay. So did Dr. Christina, amazing. Who would have guessed? So did Dr. Christina, did this doctor make any references, or I can't remember exactly what the Eunuch archive connection is to the doctor.
No. I was just bringing that up because I was saying that within WPATH and within these organizations, you have a lot of people arguing for the normalization of fetishes anyway.
Right. Yes.
So,
yes. But this is an interesting one, because this is the normalizing of a fetish that actually exists in a production line at the Tavistock. Mm-hmm. This is a production. This is a real life story that could be found in the Eunuch archives. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. It mirrors what's happening in society, which is why it's so shocking. And the idea that someone could find sexual pleasure in doing this to children. And it brings to mind for me Dr. Marcy Bowers, the current WPATH president, who on the Jazz Jennings reality show remarked that Jazz Jennings could be a porn star while he was photographing Jazz's genitals while Jazz was underage. And
you forget sometimes how insane this is.
On national TV, that comment, it really stuck with me. And I saw that just a few months before I started looking into this. And it's just always kind of stuck with me that how much of this is driven by pornography.
Yeah. I mean, we've always been told, one of the things we speak about is PIE, the Pedophile Information Exchange, an organization that actually called themselves the Pedophile Information Organization, Pedophile Information Exchange, and was promoted in the UK by politicians, by left-wing, it's exactly the same as it is now, by left-wing people who thought they were being terribly progressive. And they kind of had much more success and much more visibility than they should have had before someone realized what was happening and shut it down. This seems like a more insidious version of PIE, one where the pedophilia isn't in the title, where it is behind passwords, behind kind of kept quiet, kept secret, but very much a part of it, very much a part of what. It's almost as if they are trying to cast every paraphilia as a gender identity. Would that be fair to say?
Yes. I absolutely think so. And also, when you look at the history of the pedophile organizing that went on through the 70s to 80s, it wasn't just the UK. It wasn't just the US. We had NAMBLA in the US, but there was also Netherlands with Fritz Bernard. Germany. This was a multinational push. They were very organized, and that was before the internet. You know what I mean? So, and when you say someone stopped them, Well, it was feminists who stopped them. It was
Mm,
women in particular, and especially lesbian women who stopped them by they were bringing up, stories of like incest and child abuse in order to do that, and that's been kind of forgotten in within the history. But now we have this, which I see as mirroring that movement. And what have they done? They've slandered feminists as turfs from the start. So
yes.
no one will listen to them this time. It almost seems sometimes when you look at it, it almost seems calculated to me, but that's just my opinion. So
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I've often thought about whether one could say this was calculated, or whether it's just a kind of naturally forming movement. And I think it feels like it might be the latter. I mean, as soon as you get connected pedophiles together, they're going to try and start changing the world to suit to be their perfect world. And I
right.
think that when you have the Tavistock Center, which is a center devoted to early affirmation, which is basically getting your penis cut off as quickly as possible, then you're creating a kind of perfect world for the type of people who would visit the Eunuch archives.
Hmm.
Anyway, yeah, sorry,
Yep.
that's
There was one other point I wanted to mention too, which was this guy. Now I don't know how to pronounce his name, as I've only read it, so I don't know if it's pronounced
okay.
Jesus or Jesus, but I'm going to
Oh
say
yeah.
Jesus.
Hmm.
So I don't know who this person actually is, but they seem to be someone with quite a bit of power, because if what he claims is true, then he was invited by former WPATH president Eli Coleman to edit the standards of care, but also he worked with the American Psychiatric Association, the APA, on the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for Mental Disorders. So he claims to have edited the DSM 5. Now, if you look at the castration fetish, which is technically called Scoptic syndrome,
Hmm.
Scoptic syndrome was in the DSM 4. It was removed from the DSM 5. So it would seem to suggest that
Yeah.
if this is true, perhaps this person removed that from the DSM. Now, that's my speculation. So I can't prove that, but that's just my speculation or what it seems like to me. Also, at the
What
same
would
time, sorry, at the same time that you have this removing of that paraphilia from
Mhm.
being a mental disorder, you also have the introduction of the transgender child into the DSM.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So what was the word for the cup? What was it? Uh,
Sorry?
what was the word for that was removed? The word
Scoptic syndrome. That
Scoptic syndrome. So
That
that
refers to the Skopsy. The Skopsy was a castration cult in Russia that operated for about 2 centuries.
Scoptic syndrome, and that
Yeah,
word was removed because they wanted to stop treating it as a what?
as a paraphilia or mental disorder.
Right. So they removed it to stop treating it as a paraphilia or a mental disorder, and they introduced it as actually just another gender identity. The desire to have your penis cut off is just another gender identity for sexual reasons. That's all.
Well, yeah.
No?
I don't know if they introduced it in that way, but in general, the shift just to normalize these kinds of things. Yeah.
And then at the same time that they brought these people who enjoyed reading fantasies of children being castrated, the concept of the trans child was introduced.
Gender
Okay.
dysphoria in children was added. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. Let me just read out a little bit more of this because are you okay? You okay for time, G? I know we're
Yeah.
going
Oh,
long.
yeah.
I
Oh, it's
mean,
fine.
this whole video, all I want people to do is to tell their friends about it and to talk about it and to try and get journalists interested in it, because we've run out of ideas. We, you know, um, so. Within the protected fiction archives, there were over 3,000 stories involving minors, including the explicit sexual abuse of children, and minor was a specially curated tag that users could select to easily access stories specifically featuring children. The fictional pornography includes themes such as Nazi doctors castrating children, baby boys being fed milk with estrogen in order to be violently sex trafficked as adolescents, and pedophilic fantasies of children who have been castrated to halt their puberty, freezing them in a childlike state. I mean, what does this sound like? What does this sound like? You know? And then you have this other person, a long-standing site contributor with connections to WPATH is Dr. Christer Hildal Willett, who, according to his Facebook profile, studied medical sciences at Ohio State University. Willett uses the moniker Christoph on the forum alongside an avatar of a nun with a photograph of his face superimposed, hiking up her habit to reveal lingerie and a pink chainsaw. In June 2009, Willett was invited by WPATH, well, obviously a very senior and august person to speak on the development of standards of care for individuals with a male to eunuch gender identity disorder at a conference in Oslo. In May 2010, the contents of Willett's Oslo lecture were published in the International Journal of Transgenderism, an academic journal issued by WPATH. Willett, who co-authored the report, surveys conducted with the participation of members of the Eunuch archives. Now, let me just read this. This is a quote. A large number of men with gender dysphoria who desire to be emasculated do not fit the classical pattern of male to female transsexualism, reads the abstract. They loathe their manhood, but do not identify as nor wish to be female. Instead, they seek castration to become something outside the binary sexes. Now, it sounds to me that this is pure fantasy in a way, because like why would anyone be reading pornography if they had castrated themselves? It sounds to me that this is pornography for people who enjoy the idea of others being castrated. Would that be fair?
I would disagree with that, actually.
Oh, okay. Go on, tell me.
I've actually seen castration videos that were posted to the Usenet forum there that they were selling. Now, people tend to not understand that what castration means and what it entails. So this is a problem too, because there is nothing to suggest that a man who has had, so castration is one or both testicles being removed. No way around saying that. Anyway, but people don't tend to understand is that the libido can be active. You don't lose sexual function totally, and in some strange cases, there's even been cases of the libido increasing after when it's done in a fetishistic context. And this was noted too by a researcher who was Laura Engelstein, who's written about the Skoptic cult. That was noted among members of that cult as well, that sometimes the castration, again, it does not involve the penis, it's the testicles, it's different, that the castration would cause extreme libido, in fact, in some cases. So, yeah, it's really important for people to understand that, because you might tend to think, well, for example, chemical castration of sex offenders, we do that for a reason to control them. But even there's research showing that that's not always effective and can actually have the opposite effect in some cases. So it's really, we don't know why. It's unpredictable. So
right. Let's hear a little bit more about about Willett, who advises WPATH. There are two disturbing videos of Willett posted to his YouTube channel. In both, he is dressed in a nun's habit, holds a cigar, and shouts obscenities. Sorry, sometimes I can't believe this is really happening. In Sister Christer on Cussing, he role plays as though addressing an audience of children while reading out a list of swear words. In the other, Sister Christer's safe sex message, he waves around a condom while addressing imaginary children, I presume, about the importance of prophylactics. Willett has made many repeated appeals for financial contributions from forum members. According to a 2019 post by Willett, the website at that time received over 20 million hits per month and was run on 7 different services, a situation that he was 7 different servers, a situation that he was personally subsidizing. 20 million hits per month.
Yeah, I don't know how much I believe that.
Right. Okay. Thank God. Like it's bad that people are connecting at all, that these people are connecting at all. But the fact that if it was 20 million hits a month, I'd be very worried. Donations were being accepted via PayPal and through a charitable educational corporation set up by Willett. Donors were instructed to send cash payments to a P.O. box in Minneapolis, registered under the name Worm Wyvern. Documents obtained by Redux revealed that Worm Wyvern was dissolved by the state of Minnesota for a violation of the Nonprofit Corporation Act, which asserts that the organization's activities may not be for personal gain. Is there any significance to Worm Wyvern, that name?
The significance there in the name, yeah, I don't know actually. I was trying to figure that out myself.
What were you going to say?
I was just saying the reason that I pointed out the financial aspect is because I had noticed as well that in the Usenet forum, it seemed like things were being sold, services, videos, and so on were being sold. So there's some kind of cash flow that was going on with this website.
Right. Okay. Minneapolis is, for nearly 2 decades, the Eunuch Archive has hosted an annual meeting of members. This event is held in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Willett's area of residence, and is co-hosted by Willett and the pseudonymous Jesus, or Jesus, as we had him earlier. Minneapolis is also where WPATH's headquarters were based for years, as well as the city where former WPATH president Eli Coleman currently lives and works. Coleman served as lead chair, overseeing the most recent updates to the WPATH standards of care. So there's the WPATH link again. In 2000, stop me anytime you want to add something here, G. In 2008, a group of researchers from Canada and California collaborated on a research project on the topic of the male castration fetish and published their findings in a paper called A Passion for Castration, characterizing men who are fascinated with castration but have not been castrated. That's kind of what I was referring to earlier. It felt to me like this was like more for people who were, but I understand that some do actually get castrated. According to research, the majority, 52% of wannabes who fantasized about castration, whether chemical or surgical, selected sexual fantasy as their origin of interest in castration. Several respondents wrote about becoming sexually aroused when witnessing animal castration. I'm so sorry, everyone, but there's nothing good in this story. It just gets worse and worse. Over 700 individuals responded to a survey shared on the Eunuch archive describing their reasons for their ambition towards eunuchdom. For some, castration was a very important first step towards a male-to-female transition, the study's authors noted. As male-to-female transsexuals, they sought to rid their bodies of unwanted testosterone with or without supplemental estrogen to further their transition. One respondent wrote of his desire for becoming it, a submissive guy without sex drive. More common was the slave metaphor. As a slave, it would allow a greater focus on serving the pleasure of the master. Anyway, for some reason, this story isn't news. This story isn't kind of traveling far outside the pages of Redux and the feminists who are sharing it. But I'm hoping that this video, I'm hoping we give people some idea of why it's important, why it needs to be much more widely disseminated, and where we're going. I mean, we are really looking at a place where every sexual fetish will be normalized and called a gender identity. And some very disturbing men are behind it.
And look, I just wanted to reiterate that point. Again, the significance of this is that it shows the direct link between what we have been saying all along. And even some of the stories on that site involve pedophiles themselves being chemically castrated and enjoying it. So there's this common thread that we're seeing about the abuse of children as a projected sexual fantasy of adult men with nefarious intentions. And I think Heather Brunskill-Evans has talked about that in some detail, but we've been saying it, and here it is. Here is a kind of a proof that we can show that's not just, one of these unfortunately increasing amount of stories, but this is actually WPATH.
Yeah, I know. I'm hoping that we can get it out there. Libs of Rick TikTok retweeted. I'm sure that refers to something else. Right, Genevieve. Last question. Can I ask you something personal?
I get
Sorry,
maybe.
that's a loaded question. You've been looking at this for the last few years. How has it affected you? You're seeing some pretty rough stuff because no one else is reporting on this. How, how, how do you keep yourself sane, and what kind of effect does it have on you?
I mean, I've had nightmares about some of this stuff, I'm gonna be honest, um, but I just think it's really important, and, I also just I don't wanna complain either because there are people who are being hurt by this tremendously who need our support. So in part, that's why I do it. I want for people who have been saying this and pointing this connection out to realize we're not crazy,
Yeah,
because sometimes it really feels like we're going crazy, but we're not. It's there and it's happening in plain sight. And so I just to cope with it, sometimes I go running. I've actually become something of a distance runner
yeah,
now. So yeah, that helps. Exercise is great. So
yeah.
I recommend it for mental health reasons. But um, yeah, otherwise, I just feel like it's so important that somebody needs to do it. Somebody needs to call these people out and show what it is that's really behind all of this, because often people tend to get wrapped up in good intentions, which is fair. People want to do the right thing, people want to be helpful. But in my experience, in my personal experience, the people running the show do not have good intentions,
Mm,
um,
mm.
or at least the ones that I've seen. So, or it's my opinion. I know. I don't want to get you into any trouble, but that's my perspective. So,
Well, I think that it's certainly true that there's a lot of people in positions, highly influential positions, whose motives need to be examined. Let's definitely say that. Genevieve, I can't thank you enough for not just this story, but the many you've contributed to my site. You really kind of open up a heart of darkness to this stuff that is a really essential part of the puzzle. So thank you so much. Please thank Anna as well, and keep it up. And hopefully you won't have to do it forever.
thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Speak to you soon, Genevieve, and thank you again. Thanks to everyone who joined in. We'll see you soon. Oh, we might see you on Sunday. It's my birthday, so we might do a birthday.
Oh,
We
happy
might do.
birthday.
Thank you very much. We might do a birthday mess on Sunday, so hopefully see you then. All right, bye bye.